The space race was one of the most memorable events of the 20th century, and at the same time one of the most controversial. Why does the American flag wave from a non-existent wind? Why don't the footprints of astronauts match the photos? And how could an underdeveloped space industry send a man to the moon at all? These arguments of moon hoax believers are still popular today. Unfortunately, history is relentless and can give a clear answer to the eternal question: did Americans actually land on the moon? Leave your opinion in the comments. Meanwhile, let's warm up with shocking statistics. According to polls, 57% of adults in Russia believe the moon mission was filmed in Hollywood. Every 6th Briton and every 10th Swiss shares this opinion. Even in the US, about 3% of citizens sincerely believe they were deceived and that Americans never landed. The moon hoax was born in 1968 when the New York Times published a humorous article. Allegedly, in a Chicago bar, a tipsy NASA specialist showed astronaut training footage that looked suspiciously like shots from the lunar surface. Conspiracy stories always sell well, and within a year, the main claims against the moon landings had formed. We won't dwell on the entire hoax movement, since that would only promote not-so-smart people. Instead, let's focus on the facts. The most popular one is the American flag on the moon waving in the wind. Since the moon has almost no atmosphere, there should be no wind at all. This is the favorite argument of those claiming the photos were shot in a studio on Earth. And to them, the idea of wind inside a closed studio seems normal. Brilliant, right? But anyone who didn't skip physics in school can easily debunk this myth. There is no air on the moon, so a planted flag would simply hang down. To fix this, the top of the pole had a horizontal rod that held the cloth so it wouldn't sag. Naturally, when the astronauts set it up, the flag shook as they tried to push it into the ground. There is no wind on the moon, but basic vibration still exists. Shake a towel indoors, folds appear without wind. The same with the flag. It swayed during setup, which some mistook for wind. NASA's restored videos and photos clearly show that after installation, the flag stayed still and didn't move. Since we're talking about photos, let's also debunk a couple more myths. On no lunar photos are stars visible, though it seems they should shine even brighter without an atmosphere. Here, photography explains everything. It's a matter of exposure time.
Try this. Switch your camera to selfie mode. Stand with your back to the sun. You'll get two options. Either a clear face with a blurred background, or a detailed background with a washed-out face. The same goes for space. To capture stars, astronauts would need long exposure, but then the lunar surface would blur. Since filming was done in daylight, the sun outshone all stars.
That's why the stars were sacrificed. The same effect can be seen in modern space photos. With long exposure, you get stunning star panoramas. With short exposure, the ISS and Earth, but no stars. Perhaps the most absurd yet popular detail is the famous photo of Buzz Aldrin's footprint on the lunar surface. The photo shows a sole pattern that doesn't match the museum images of astronaut boots. Memes about this are still common online. But here's the catch. When stepping onto the moon, Armstrong's crew wore spacesuits with overshoes that had wider soles. Since lunar gravity is much weaker, a wide sole was essential, and those overshoes had the vertical stripes visible in the footprint photo. We hope you see how fragile and absurd the moon hoax arguments really are. There are many smaller claims too, easily debunked by logic. For example, solar radiation supposedly should have destroyed the photos and even harmed the astronauts. But a decade before Armstrong, the Soviet Luna 3 probe successfully photographed the moon, using American film stock resistant to radiation. Doubting that American technology from the 1950s wasn't available to Apollo 11 in 1969 is sheer nonsense. As for the astronauts' safety, the spacecraft hull was well shielded. Inside Gemini 11, radiation levels were just 0.203 rad-hour, not too high. Yet even with this evidence, moon hoax believers aren't convinced. They are unsatisfied even with the words of Alexei Leonov, the first man in open space, designer Boris Chertok, and the entire Soviet leadership. The USSR monitored the moon landing under a microscope, and even the slightest hint of fraud would have been blown up worldwide. But this doesn't stop the tin-foil hat crowd. They claim the USSR and the USA made a secret deal. The Soviets would acknowledge the landings as real, and in return the US would keep quiet about allegedly dozens of dead Soviet cosmonauts. Considering these same countries nearly started World War III, assuming they colluded in a hoax is rather bold, isn't it? Things became even funnier in 2009, when NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter celebrated the 40th anniversary of the landing by photographing lunar modules, landing sites, and even the tracks left by Apollo rovers. You'd think that would silence the critics, but not really. The final and main argument of skeptics since 1972, despite insane technological progress, humans haven't returned to the moon. Only now programs similar to Apollo are starting again, with the first missions planned about a decade from now. This complaint seems logical at first glance. After all, NASA's computing power in 1969 fits easily into a modern smartphone. If Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon back then, shouldn't we all be able to do it 50 years later? Yet NASA stated that it still requires a lot of work, and if everything goes well, humanity will return in 2024. The simple explanation is money. In 1966, NASA's budget was nearly 5% of US federal spending. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $43 billion, almost as much as Russia's entire defense budget today. For comparison, in 2018, NASA received just 0.5%. The space race was simply too expensive, so it was shut down. And the moon turned out to be less interesting than expected. They brought back plenty of soil, and there wasn't much left to study, except maybe building a base for Mars exploration, which NASA and Elon Musk now plan. Musk once promised a moon base by 2015, but starting from scratch is required since all projects were frozen decades ago. Over 50 years, too much knowledge was lost, and the wooden methods of the past need modern replacements. Scientists are working on that now. The difference is that in the past, space exploration fascinated ordinary people, while today they are more interested in the latest iPhone models. Funding for astronauts is scarce, but things will soon change. In our lifetime, humanity will return to the moon and then move on to Mars. If you still have questions about the moon hoax, leave them in the comments and we'll answer them all. Until next time, friends.